Thank you very much. It's great to see such a packed room. It's great to be here with the CEO of Patagonia. Let me ask you all a question. How many of you own a piece of Patagonia gear? Okay, how many of you own a pullover? Pants? Socks? Shirts? All of the above? Okay, I'm pretty much all of the above, although there's one problem. I have an 18-year-old son who went to college this year. And the day we dropped him off, I came back kind of teary-eyed, and I went in my closet. No more Patagonias in my closet. So I'm going to go to Parents' Weekend in a couple weeks, and I will be stealing my clothes back. So this is a great event. We're here to hear about Patagonia's 100-year experiment to be a responsible company, and that they have. I want to welcome the co-sponsors. It's a long list, actually. I want to know from Amy who didn't want to co-sponsor this event. Kogod School of Business, Washington College of Law. Dean Fairfax is here somewhere. There he is. Yay, okay. The School of Public Affairs, College of Arts and Sciences, the Alumni Association, the Environmental Policy Center, and the Environmental Science Department. So you can, there you go. So you can see by the number of co-sponsors how much excitement there is for today's session. And I want to give a big shout out to the Sine Institute. You heard about it. They're a laboratory for university-wide collaboration and an incubator for policy innovation. They bring people together across the campus to talk about the most important issues of our day. At Kogod, we're also excited about this because our sustainability management program is one of the leading sustainability programs in the country, and it's an area of great strength, and Ryan and Patagonia have been a leader in this space. In fact, we want to start, partly inspired by this, a CEO series on sustainability, which we'll be announcing soon. We're lining up some great CEOs. So we're here to hear about the path that Patagonia has taken and the path that Ryan has taken. Let me tell you a little about him. So he has a distinguished background. He rose up through the company, he ran Europe, Middle East. But I think really what he did is so instructive for all of you, our students. I always advise students that you'll be the most successful if you find that overlap in the Venn diagram between what you're good at and what you love. Okay, so Ryan went to undergrad at UNC Charlotte, 49ers, got an MBA, and then he moved to Utah. Why? He loves rock climbing, he loves mountain biking, he's an outdoorsman. With his MBA, he got a job at a company called Black Diamond, which is another great outdoor gear company. I have a lot of Black Diamond equipment. And his job was working in the warehouse, packing boxes for $6 an hour with an MBA, okay? Why did he do that? Because he loved it and he saw his passion. Because of that, he rose up to be the president and CEO of Black Diamond, took it public, and then ended up at Patagonia. So the lesson from his career is find something you're good at, find something you love, and you'll thrive. So Ryan Gellert, we're thrilled to have you as the Sine Institute Distinguished Lecturer of 2022. To interview him and to facilitate this conversation is Amy Dacey, the Executive Director of the Sine Institute. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see everybody. We're getting a little cozy down here because it's standing room only, so I hope you're comfortable, Ryan. Thank you, Dean Marchick. We welcome you to campus. We're so excited for you and your leadership in the business school. To all of our sponsors, again, not only did it show the collaboration that we're looking for across campus on the issues that we care about the most, but it really shows that some of the issues we'll be talking about today are embraced by all over campus. So we're really excited about that. I just want to give a big shout out because none of this comes together. It certainly wasn't me. I want to thank Corley Kenna from Patagonia. I want to thank the entire Sine Institute team. I want to thank the SBA team that helped and facilitated everything for us. Let's give them a round of applause because a lot of work went into this. So Ryan, welcome. We've been waiting, for your arrival. We've been talking about this for a while now. I was really nervous today because I thought, there's not a lot to talk about. Not much has been happening at Patagonia. The world's been a little boring. It's been on a lull. So, but hopefully we'll muddle through and we'll find out.
Figure it out.
We'll figure it out. No, but Ryan, thank you so much for being here. I think one of the big things that it's only been a week since Patagonia's big announcement. And I'm sure for Corley and some of your team, it seems like, it's been months, but it made such an impact. It was affects so many different facets, not only of the business, but of individuals and community. I think it's a really good place to start. I know we have a very, informed group here, and I'm sure they read a lot about it, but I'd love to hear from you. What was this all about? What was the impetus, and what do you think is the most important things to come out of it? So welcome.
Thank you. And I'll answer that, but let me just say, first of all, really, really a pleasure and an honor to be here. So I've heard so much about American University. We were talking before. I've got some close colleagues and friends that have graduated from different schools here. So really an honor to be here. And to be able to be sort of packed in here like sardines together with all of you, it's just, I mean, this is where the magic happens, right? When we're actually back together. And I don't know for many of the people in the room if this feels like the first time you've done an event like this in a while. I know for me, I can count on one hand, and most of them are this week that I have. So it's really, really nice to be here. Going to the news of the last week. So yeah, I mean, let me try to sum it up this way, and then I'll break it apart. A number of people that I had conversations with and explained to them before last Wednesday out of necessity, this is what we're going to do, that knew Yvonne well, meaning people that had been in meaningful roles for with the organization for a long time. They sort of sat there, let the story wash over them, and they said, oh my God, I can't believe this. And then at the same time, I can't imagine Yvonne would have done anything but this. And I think that really captures how so many of us feel about it as we're still kind of trying to process it. In that I include myself. And I've worked on very little else for 2 years, for the last 2 years. I've been really down in this thing. And I think it was only last Wednesday when we rolled this out to our employees, including our former employees, all of our employees around the world in real time, when Yvonne got up, and I'm not going to share everything he said because I think it was really for that moment, but I'll share this. At the beginning, he said, he gave a preamble about, this is what I wanted to accomplish with this business. This is how I've thought about business. This is what's important to me. And when we became $1 billion business some number of years ago, it was the worst day of my life. He said, because the truth is, I've never known a $1 billion business that I respect, and I sure as hell don't want to own one. And then he talked for a while about his values, and he talked for a while about what's most important to him. And the last thing he said was, and today is the very best day of my life. And that was one of the most emotional things to feel in your gut from somebody who's just usually not that sort of self-revealing. But what is the process? It was a couple of years ago, Yvonne, well, first of all, the company's entering its 50th year next year. And Yvonne's always talked about Patagonia as a 100-year experiment in doing business differently. And along the way, at different points, going back a couple of decades, he has said, maybe we're better off selling this business and taking all the money off the table and putting it to work. And Doug Tompkins, some of you may know, he was the founder of the North Face. He was the founder with his first wife of a company called Esprit. He sold Esprit. He took a few $100 million off the table, and he went down to Argentina and Chile, and he and his second wife, Chris, have become the largest conservationists in the history of private conservation. And Doug was a very close friend of Yvonne's, but he was also somewhat of a mentor for Yvonne. And so Yvonne had that seed planted in that conversation. And if you ever met Doug, he was pretty persistent. He was always in Yvonne's ear, and Yvonne said, no, it just doesn't feel right. I think we can have more impact by running the business. But 2 years ago, he said, look, we need to figure this out. I want to figure it out while I'm still around. And it seems to me, my family, my wife and kids want to figure this out while I'm still around. So you got to figure this out. And I'll be honest with you, the first time he said that, I tried to sidestep it and ignore it because I couldn't imagine Patagonia without the Schnards involved, and I couldn't figure out how we'd landed anything other than a sale or taken the company public. I thought, we may be able to sell a piece of it, but one way or the other, things are going to have to change. And so I tried to ignore it. And the next time I went over to his house, this was in the depths of COVID, I was sitting on his patio, just he and I. He said, "How's that going?" And I said, I've been busy with some other things. And he said, and this is the sense of humor and sort of the personality of Yvonne, he said, "I swear to God, Ryan, if you don't get on this, I'm going to the grocery store, I'm getting one of those Forbes lists of billionaires, I'm going to start cold calling people." And I said, "All right, got it. Message received. I think you're serious." So we started meeting with potential investors, people that might buy a piece of Patagonia, people that might buy the whole company. We started looking at taking the company public. I will share with you, the number that's out there in the news is that the valuation of Patagonia is about $3 billion. Had we taken it public, we would have been able to access, I think, $6-7 billion. And so it was a lot of money, possible. And the Chenards are not people that care about money, but $6-7 billion to put to work to fight the climate and ecological crisis would be pretty catalytic. And they looked at it and they just said, at the end of the day, there's two things we want to accomplish. The first is to protect the integrity of Patagonia as a model for a different way of business. And the second is to put a lot more money behind the environmental crisis right now. And so that led us on this long journey to explore options. And ultimately, we were able to create, using existing tools, something that I don't think's been done before in U.S. business.
Well, it is incredibly unique, but it's also interesting because Dean Marchick was asking all our great, guests today about who owns, what from the Patagonia brand. So does this change the business side and how that, operates? I'm sure they're wondering, how can a business make these investments and be successful? And how do you do that and still have, access so all these people can get the products that they want, the consumer side?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we think about a lot, and I know it can sound like a little bit of a philosophical concept, but I think it's a really important one, which is keeping two opposing ideas in your head at the same time and still able to move forward. And it's never been lost on us that we're a company that makes product that people may want, makes product that people like. We don't make product that people need. I mean, with all due respect to the vests and fleeces around here, you would have been able to make it to class today wearing something else. And so we know our place in the world. We work extremely hard to make quality product. We work extremely hard to build into the design and the service of our product high levels of support for ensuring extending the usable life of product, taking responsibility at the end of life. If you've got something, it's usable, but you're not using it, we'll buy it back from you and get it to somebody that will. So that's how we think about what we do. But at the end of the day, we're kind of part of the problem. We're a part of the apparel sector, making product that people may like, but they don't necessarily need. And so I think it's this complex balance that we try to drive. And ultimately, the way we think about it is, let's make it as responsibly as we can. Let's recognize there's never a place that you arrive at called sustainable. You're constantly moving the goalposts on yourself. You're constantly open sourcing solutions that you find. And even prior to the news last Wednesday, we've taxed ourselves 1% of revenue since 1985, and we give away a lot more money than that, but that's just the baseline earth tax.
I was going to say that's so interesting because it's not like last Wednesday suddenly Patagonia had a commitment to philanthropic work or any kind of investment in some of these issue areas. So it is interesting, this taxing yourself, right? And then reinvesting that piece of it so you can see kind of the business model. I will say one of the things that I was really impressed with when I was talking to Corley and we were talking about timing is she's like, okay, there's going to be this town hall with our employees. And to know you even had past employees, so much has changed for a company over 50 years with how they interact with their workforce. How do they, what was the conversation like? And what responsibility do you think a business feels toward their employees in making a big decision like this? Obviously you went to them first, so that was a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, there was never, so if you look at this whole sort of thing in chapters, and at some point we're going to talk about where's the money going to go and how you can think about that, and that's going to be the third chapter that we're living in right now. And my short answer, and happy to talk more expansively on it, is who knows? Because in chapter 1, we were trying to figure out an answer to a question that I don't think had ever really been answered before, and that led us to this legal structure. And to be honest with you, that took kind of every bit of excess time we had outside of running the business. As soon as we got that done, and the deal didn't actually get consummated a week ago, it got consummated about 5 weeks ago, we then said, let's put together an event and let's roll this out to our employees in a way that really honors the work, the contribution, and the commitment of every one of our people. And let's include, to the best of our ability, everybody that's worked for this company in the past. And so we spent about a month, if it wasn't focused on the business, it was focused on that. And it was actually the next morning, so Wednesday of last week being that day, Thursday morning, the board got together for the first time physically in 2+ years. And it was like, how the hell are we going to give this money away? And so, we're very much in that phase now, and we'll figure it out. I mean, we know what are the topics that are most important to us, but it was so important for us to focus on and include our people. And I will give Corley, who is sitting here, just an incredible amount of gratitude for really architecting this event, this moment, with some printed pieces. There was a video from Trevor Noah opening it up, and we sort of we built this anticipation for weeks, and then we had Trevor Noah intro it, but he told you almost what was happening, but not quite it. And then we did this 10-minute film piece with a number of us kind of describing it, and it was about 5 minutes into that, we said, okay, I got it. And then we had long discussions and so forth, but it was a pretty magical moment.
Well, it's interesting too, because I read certainly the New York Times article, like consuming some of the news around it. And I think for some of us, thinking like, oh, Patagonia, US, we've seen, there's a, local store right here in DC. Some students might have, gone there, but this was something that was a global news, piece. This is something that the global community had to react to and be, so for me, some of the perspective is I might know like how I saw the reaction in the US, but how was this, just received globally, and something that's so important. And like you said, to be a beacon to show what community, companies can do.
It's been shocking to me personally, the resonance that the story's gotten, and it was pretty mind-blowing. I lived and worked in Asia, I lived and worked in Europe, and so I have a bit of a network in different parts of the world personally, and the company certainly does, and we have operations, and we have a team in Korea, we have a team in Japan, we have a team in Amsterdam, and then teams spread around the continent, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina. So we've got people around the world, and the brand is visible around the world. But it has been mind-blowing, just the traction that the story has gotten, and it's been incredibly humbling. And I think there's a few reasons why it's had this much resonance. One is I just think the model kind of got broken. I think the other is, something that I think is a real reflection of the times and a not always good, which is people really need good news right now. And I think the comments that sort of struck me hardest were people saying, yeah, I'm not familiar with this company, but I read this news this morning, and I got tears in my eyes, and that really meant something special.
And I think in an interesting way, you've shared that. Just give a quote here. It says, "The climate crisis poses an existential threat. If we don't clean up our mess, we'll be history. Business has a role to play, but it's only one lever. We must use all the tools at our disposal to secure a safe, more just future." I find it very interesting. You're obviously talking about business's role. What are the tools in our toolboxes? What are the other levels and expectations that have to come together to move this forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, look, we've got business school students here. We've got the dean of the business school. This well-worn trope from Milton Friedman that the role of business is to maximize shareholder wealth, that's a fascinating concept, but I don't think it has any resonance outside of a business school at this point. If we want to continue to function that way, we know exactly what our future is going to look like. And so we can acknowledge that and think that maybe that was decent guidance for 4 decades. You can argue about that, but it sure as hell doesn't have application today. I think that governments were formed to solve the kind of problems that, big crises, and address big issues, and also pursue solutions or opportunities to where they exist. But government's fallen short, and individuals, I think, are a critical piece of this. Acting in your individual capacity and coming together as a part of civil society. I think one of the most important things people can do is vote. The next most important thing is educate yourself and vote. The third most important thing is help others vote. Those are things that every individual can do. So government's got to do what government's got to do. We've got to continue to keep the pressure on them. Individually, we've got to do what we've got to do, but the business sector must step up, period.
Well, it's interesting because, you mentioned also that there's two existential threats as humans, and that we've created to face, in climate and ecological crisis. And one of them is certainly, this the existing science behind what's happening. But I think it's really interesting, and definitely from the Sine Institute perspective, you talk about how polarization is one of the biggest threats. So I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that and your concerns, and how does something like some of the actions you're taking help, with that?
I think that is such a tricky one. I do believe that polarization and the climate crisis are two existential threats, and I think polarization is making solutions to the second, if not impossible, incredibly difficult at a time where we don't have much time to waste. I think that one of the things we work very hard to do is stay as consistent as we can on environmental topics. And I will acknowledge we're not always perfect at it. And we live in such a highly charged political environment right now. Corley and I did a TV show in New York City this morning, and there's 3 interviewees, and 2 of them are asking questions about this story, and a third one, I won't name him, but he asks a question at the end it's just an agenda with a question mark at the end, and I walked off and just said, I'm not answering it. It's a silly question, and because it's if you want to, this is your show. If you want to frame this in a way that makes your point, you don't need me to be the foil. And I just feel like so much of the conversation today is that way. I think when we're talking about inclusivity and we fail to acknowledge that the current version of capitalism just does not include or benefit enough people, it is destroying the planet. If those are political topics, then yeah, I guess we're politically charged.
You're also obviously CEO, a leader of teams, a leader, of individuals. How do you try to bring differing opinions together? What's your leadership style in that respect? Because I think we all have to find ways to communicate in a way that's inclusive. But how have you found that? Obviously, and and over the past 2 years, as you're building, out this new model too, I'm sure there was differing of opinions. How did you do that yourself?
Yeah, I would say on this model, many good examples of that. This model maybe not the best because we kept the group so small to try to pull this thing together. I think in leadership at Patagonia and in my own style in trying to navigate this, I really try to be inclusive, and I mean inclusive in a lot of ways, which is also very flat and a very open environment to bring perspectives. If you're in the room, please offer a perspective. In the absence of clarity, I usually will offer a direction, but I am really open to people pushing back and suggesting another way. I just ask that it be done respectfully, and I ask that it be sort of grounded in kind of a logic to take us forward. I think that Patagonia's worked very hard, and it's increasingly difficult. We've got 3,500 people around the world to really be as flat an organization as we can and really empower individuals to make decisions. I think some of the best decisions in our company's history have been made not by the CEO, not often by the founders, and not by leaders in the organization, but people kind of across the organization. One of the best examples I could give is on the heels of the, 2016 presidential election. And you can make that a political topic, but for us, the candidate that won was so consistently against the values that we felt were most important, particularly the environmental piece of that agenda, that we were really struggling with where to from here. And it was a junior employee in our marketing department that said, on Black Friday, why don't we give 100% of revenue, everything we sell that day, to the same grassroots organizations working on the topics that we do? That floated up very quickly to the CEO at the time. She phoned Yvonne, our founder and owner at the time. He said, that sounds great, let's do it. And the biggest Black Friday day we had in our history was $2.5 million. That day we did $10.5 million, and that decision was made before lunch.
That's amazing to think of, taking those opportunities and figuring out ways. And I do think, like we mentioned before, you didn't come upon this a week ago, say we should start investing in some of these organizations. So let's talk about that a little. You've been taxing yourself as a company. And then you have a model set up to invest in some of these NGOs that are working on various issues. What does that look like? What is the team that works on that? Like, how do you make those decisions? And then certainly this new decision will expand the ability to do that. But
I think the thing that, two analogies I'd make. One is, I think we've always thought about the work we do in our 49-year history as kind of chapters in a book. And so, as one of those chapters in the mid 90s, we came to understand the impact of conventionally grown cotton, the use of insecticides, pesticides. And so Yvonne went out and visited cotton growing areas in Southern California, and he said, these are biodiversity dead zones, and we're contributing to it. And at that time, 40% of our product was cotton. All of it was conventionally grown. And he started organizing bus tours of every single employee in the company needed to go out and see this. And at the end of that, he said, you have 18 months. Everything must be converted to organic cotton, 100% organic cotton, that's it. And everybody in the product end of the business said it can't be done. The supply chains don't exist. And he said, 18 months, 18 months. And, the business actually shrunk before it got bigger. We just had to reduce the size of the collection to accommodate that. But I think that's sort of, that's one of those big moments. And my point here is that since 1996, we've never used anything but organic cotton. We're now pioneering regenerative organic and so on and so forth. The earth tax from the mid 80s, same idea. Once we put it in place, we've sort of grandfathered it and pulled it through. And so kind of everything that we build and add, we say, okay, this needs to be a foundational piece of the business. What else do we add to it? Fair trade certification and otherwise. I think with the 1% grants, one of the things, well, there's two things that I think work really well for us there. One is they're very intentionally given to small grassroots organizations really working on the front lines. And number two, nearly every decision about how we give that money away, and it's over $15 million a year now, are made by employees. And so we allow, employees are able to volunteer to be part of the councils that make those decisions, read those grant applications. And I will tell you, from having spent 6 years with Patagonia in Europe, some of the best days of my career are when the grants councils have done all their work and they pull the whole organization together and they say, let's talk to you about who we're funding.
And it's local communities too. You're not just doing big, large national organizations. You're really going into communities to find.
I would say we actually do zero big national organizations. We just don't like to fund overhead. And we feel like, and it's not that we don't think those organizations are doing good work, but we wake up every day saying, what are we uniquely qualified to do? Where can we have an outsized impact? And that's been the thinking from day one.
I think so much has been used with the word transparency lately too, but I've been impressed. Obviously, I did my homework. Corley told me to, and I did. But I went, and I encourage everybody, I went to the Patagonia website, and all that we're talking about is this is a company that's also very transparent about what issues it cares about where it's making investments. How important is that in modern day society too, this idea of transparency and sharing, what the parts of the business are and what they're investing into?
I think it's critical. And I think, this will sound a little bit simple, but I really believe this, whether it's as an individual or a business, life's a whole lot simpler if you don't have to remember the lies you told yesterday. Just keep telling the truth, however uncomfortable it may be, but you never kind of have to build on those lies you told yesterday. And I think that that's something, we have weathered all of this as public information. We've been attacked by PETA for some practices in our supply chain. We had an issue with kind of some level of indentured servitude in our supply chain in Taiwan. We run an imperfect company today. There's a ton of issues that we're continuing to wrestle with, some forever chemistry in some of our products and microfibers and. But we talk internally and we talk externally about those issues. And every time we find an issue, if it's a problem, we solve it as quickly as we can and we own it. And if it's sort of the leading edge of the problem that we need to solve, we continue to work our asses off in doing it. I would say this, I believe that the era we're living in, and I'm not a big fan of social media, but one of the great benefits of social media is kind of a forced level of transparency on people to some extent, and politicians, but also on businesses. And I think that's wonderful. And I would also tell people that I think it's healthy that the default setting on what you hear from businesses is cynicism. And that includes Patagonia. If you're looking at me going, well, I got a bunch of tough questions, fire away when we get to that point, because I think that's what gets us to the best place.
And we are getting there because I'm sure there's going to be better questions than even what I can imagine. But I just a couple quick things. You said that you found your passion 25 years ago, rock climbing. We've got, some young people in the audience. I remember being, a freshman in college. Yes, I do remember. It was a while ago, but I have a memory of that. But this is an opportunity at this stage in your life to try and find things that you're interested in and passionate about. Like, what advice do you have for people coming to campus, to kind of explore that? And how did you, navigate that as well?
I think, in the intro, I talked a little bit about the fact that at, I don't know, mid-20s, I took a job for $6 an hour packing boxes in a warehouse. I'll add to that at 15 years old, I had a job probably for $6 an hour packing boxes in a warehouse. So I didn't feel like after 6 years of education, I had moved very far. But I grew up in a small town in Florida called Cocoa Beach, and I grew up with a brother who was he was a great surfer. I grew up same age, same school, same neighborhood as a guy named Kelly Slater, who's put together a pretty good career in surfing. I grew up with people who started surf shops, some of whom did fine, some of whom did less so. But I grew up with a lot of people with this tremendous passion for that lifestyle and that sport. And it just had such a profound impact on me. I grew up skateboarding, which I loved. But the one thing I knew for sure, I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life doing that. I started snowboarding. I loved it. I knew I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life forged in that sport. I went climbing one day for an hour, and I was like, that's it, I'm done. I'll spend the rest of my life doing this. And so for me, and I would be very careful about taking career advice from me, but I just have always said, what do I enjoy? And that's what I'm going to do. And I think in the intro, you said, this Venn diagram of what are you good at and what do you enjoy? I would add a third, given all that's at stake. What does the world need? And if you can get these three things in alignment, I don't think you can do better than that. And so for me, not lecturing you all on how to live your lives, I think it's just constantly asking yourself, what do you find interesting? Where is there an opportunity to learn something new? How can you challenge yourself? What do you take from that? And where do you go from here?
Final question from me. We spend a lot of time using the word impact and finding, impact. And I think it's sometimes easier to see a $1 billion company making a decision about moving money to issues that need, help and support. But sometimes I think for all of us as an individual, we wonder what's our individual impact. So, and that can seem overwhelming, like, seeing, resources and other things that are happening. What do you think about our individual impact, and why is it important for people to find their path to be on their own, be helpful?
Yeah, I think as I said before, just there's such a need for all of us to engage. And I wish, I feel actually really guilty as a 50-year-old guy sitting in front of you all, saying, I think the need for this generation to engage is much higher than it was for mine. I think candidly, we had the luxury, and I'm embarrassed to acknowledge that now as I reflect back on it, of being more lazy. Things were simpler. And I think that it is increasingly critical that you really hold businesses and elected leaders at all levels to account. And I think the best ways you can do that are caring, participating, educating, and encouraging others to do the same. I just think it's so, so important, and perhaps feels very difficult to understand, or even perhaps a level of resentment for the kind of environment and the broader environment beyond just the natural world that I think we've left you all.
And I would encourage everybody to go. The Patagonia website has opportunities of ways you can get engaged, right? I mean, right there, like volunteering or lending your voice to some of these things that you care about the most as a company.
Yeah, there's two things right now. One is around the upcoming elections, and particularly around registering to be a poll worker. So that's a great opportunity should you feel so moved. And the other, which is not tied to any one particular period of time, is Patagonia Action Works. And that basically creates connections for skilled volunteering in the organizations working on issues that you might feel important, both in your local community and elsewhere.
Well, I want to thank also AU Votes that brought us materials today. There's buttons out there. You can go to the library today if you need help with your absentee ballot. I have a personal history that believes that every single person should vote, and that matters. And we get the leaders that we vote for. And so if we're not voting, we're not getting people that represent us. So I think it's a huge part of what the campus. So if you need any help whatsoever, sometimes it can seem like a complicated process, but you should do it. So that's also available. Okay, we have some volunteers who are going to help bring a microphone around so you can ask questions. I ask that if you ask a question, we're going to do students first, so certainly we want to hear from our students first. Please say your name and then also say just what school you're from or what major, just so we can get some context of different students that we have. Who wants to start it off with Ryan? Oh, that went up very fast. I think we're right here.
Thank you. All right. Hi, Ryan. My name is Jack. I attend Kogod School of Business. And for my question today, amidst the news of the $3 billion stake in the company trust, as Patagonia has always seemed to pioneer in the apparel and sustainability business and industry, how do you think this recent news might affect other public and private companies within the sector? Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. I think that based on our history, it takes time. But I think that what we have found is that it starts to redefine the conversation about what's possible, even within business leadership. I will tell you, I'll leave names out of this just to make, but we were in DC yesterday, we were up in New York last night, and this morning met with the governor, met with the CEOs of quite a few large companies, and this was well, the governor of California was quoting the article in the New York Times, including, fine references down, and you're just like, oh my God, like I'm surprised you know who we are. And, so I don't think we ever take that for granted. And so there's just, I do think this story in particular, while I expect somewhere close to 0 companies to make a similar move in the short term, I think it's put a lot of heat on a lot of business leaders in a lot of companies across industries, and their employees are pressing them on what they're going to do in the face of the crisis that we as humans have created. And my hope is that it just continue to expand the conversation. I would love to see it do more. What we're also going to really work hard to do as we figure out how to put this money to work is see if we can't make a minor dent in environmental philanthropy and figure out how we can get some of these bigger organizations moving faster with less overhead. And I think that's also part of the model that we want to pioneer as well. So thank you.
Great question. Okay, who's next? Okay, I think I saw this hand right here. Shelby or Caleb, right here.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name's Chandler Randall, and I'm also at the Kogod School of Business. My question is...
you have a Patagonia vest on.
Of course, had to
That is
do it.
amazing. Thank you so much for doing that.
What season of Silicon Valley were you on?
5. No. Does your decision to give away so much of the profit, could that affect the company's ability to become even more sustainable? You've noted that sustainability is an ongoing mission. I'm just curious if that could negatively impact your ability to improve your sustainability efforts.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. No, I think that this is something that we've been asked this question. I actually think that's probably the best version of the question that I've heard so far. But often we have been hearing it around one of 2 other things. So I think they all kind of point in the same direction. One is your employees. Are you going to pay them? Or are they going to continue to prosper as part of the company? And unequivocally, yes. Just like my answer to that is unequivocally yes. And then the third area that people often go is, and this one I find just kind of wacky. If you read the New York Times piece, this was the dissenting voice, which is once you take the competitiveness out of it, I guess it's just going to sort of flitter away. Who misunderstood that we aren't incredibly competitive people? And the owners, they may have their own sort of approach that they bring to it, but they hate losing. And they believe in the things that they build. They don't feel the need to benefit from winning. But let's be clear, they hate losing. And so that was never what got us out of bed in the morning was, let's see how much money we can make, how much stuff we can sell. It isn't today and it won't be tomorrow. And so I think, and this is, rolling all the way back to those early conversations with Yvonne a couple of years ago, the reason I didn't want to see the family exit the business was because I believe the big idea, we can't give enough money away to solve the problems we've created. If we are going to do something to make a small dent in the universe, it's going to continue to model a different form of capitalism. And that, I think, is the big idea. The money is on top of that. And if we don't pay our people well, if we don't make great product, if we don't provide service that people are excited about, if we don't continue to move the goalposts on ourselves as it relates to minimizing our footprint, the whole thing falls apart, and all we are is a bag of cash.
Thank you. My name is Moises from Kogod School of Business. Well, my question goes more towards sales. We're heading towards the end of the year. What do you see again, units versus prices? And for 2023, how do you see consumers towards prices? Strong or weak?
So I just want to make sure I answer the question precisely. It's looking out into the next year, what do I see happening with prices and consumers?
Well, I mean, on sales, you see selling more units or selling more in prices?
Okay. I think, tell me if this gets to the heart of your question. I've been waiting for a recession for a while now, not because I'm necessarily looking forward to one. I just really anticipate that we're headed towards one. And if it's, how long it lasts, how deep it goes, that's beyond me. But I think that we're headed that way. I think if one of the impacts of that is that people buy less of things that they like but don't need, I think that would be a wonderful outcome. And if that impacts the top line of Patagonia, wonderful outcome. So I just think it's needed. I think a big part of the reason that we're in the position we're in is we just buy too much stuff. And having spent 6 years in Europe, Europeans buy too much stuff too, but I think there's a degree of difference. And so I think we've just really got to challenge ourselves on the amount of stuff we own and our whole relationship with things. So when I look at 2023, I am expecting things to slow and tighten. I also believe that although our cost basis is going up quite a bit, both in wages and in our supply chain, I think we're going to have to be very, very thoughtful about how much of that we can pass through to our customers, which of course in times like that puts pressure on our margin. So we make less for every unit we sell. But I think that when I look into the next 18 months, that's kind of how I think about it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Caleb, let's get a question from here and then we'll come down in the front after.
Hi, my name is Nitya, and I'm a double major in SIS and the College of Arts and Sciences, so environmental science. And I was wondering, you've talked a lot about donating to grassroots nonprofits as well as nonprofits that have lower overhead costs. Do you have any concerns about how that might affect the way that employees at those nonprofits are being treated, since nonprofits with lower overhead costs are usually working their employees a lot harder? And then also considering the issues with donating lots of money to grassroots organizations when they've always been working on a smaller scale and maybe don't know exactly what to do with that much money.
Those are really, really good questions. So thank you. Those are, I'm pretty impressed by all the questions so far. So whoever's next, don't screw it up. We're riding a hot hand here. Yeah, those are great questions and things we wrestle with all the time. So let me start with the second first, which is this notion of putting too much money into the hands of people that have been running on leaner budgets and just sort of inundating them or drowning them in cash. I think that's something we think about a lot. I'll be honest, I don't think that that's something that we have had to wrestle and navigate that much, because when we give away let's call it $15 million a year prior to the news last week, we've generally done that, and pretty intentionally, in small increments of between about $5,000 and $15,000 per grant. We certainly many exceptions where we've gone far beyond that, but in general, that's how we grant. And the other things that we do, and I think this gets to kind of the heart of your excuse me, the heart of your first question, which is this: we have always had an approach of funding organizations in areas where we have a footprint, and a footprint meaning employees. And so at this point, that's a lot of the world, but it's certainly not all of the world. And the reason we've done that is because we really focus on building relationships and community with the grantees that we work with. And I think a lot of the value goes way beyond just the money that we send. It's actually the catalytic impact of, okay, so Patagonia's, you've got a relationship there and they feel comfortable with this. It is often us helping them tell their story and push the things that are most important to them, particularly if we can find opportunities to do that at sensitive and important times. and at times to the best of our ability. I mean, we run, it's been sidelined like so many things during COVID, but we've run something for 20-something years, and we run it on 3 continents called Tools for Grassroots Activists. And that's where we bring together our grantee communities in different parts of the world, and we teach them a range of capacity building skills to help them to ensure that they've got skills that they might otherwise lack. So I think it's very much a relationship that we look to build, and I think we're hypersensitive to create an environment where people are being pushed harder. I mean, we're not setting the tempo for these organizations, period. We also, by the way, in the films that we do, we don't drive these narratives. We serve the grantees on the front lines of this work. And I think it is really important that we constantly say, how can we help you do what you're doing? What are the things that we can be supportive on versus Patagonia wants to make a film, would you guys participate in? And I think that's 180 degrees from the right way for us to approach it.
Caleb, the student right down here in the orange shirt has been waiting, or the orange jacket. I don't know if it's a Patagonia jacket.
No pressure, but all the questions have been
we're
really
not only
good.
calling on Patagonia people, I
It's
promise.
Patagonia Houdini. It's my favorite one. Yeah, so I'm Johnson from China. I'm studying the environmental studies at AU. I'm the freshman year student. So the lady we just talked about the sponsorship to the NGOs by the Patagonia. So I want to talk about the Blue Heart. It's a documentary made by the founder of Patagonia, Ivan. Talks about the anti-dam movement in the Balkan area. So I want to ask, like, I found like Patagonia has very specific interest in the anti-dam movement. So how do you, why do you like provide such a great support to the people that are focusing on the dam issues, and how do you establish the relationship with them? Yeah.
God, just when I thought, I'm going to sound like I'm pandering, but just when I thought we couldn't get better questions. So I think there's 2 questions or 2 points I want to make. One is around the Balkans specifically, and that's a topic, that's an area of the world that I've spent a lot of time, and I'd love to share some stories here about that. But let's talk about hydropower and dams. Hydropower is the only sort of defined often as green energy that is driving species to extinction, and that is impacting communities and displacing communities that live along rivers in many cases over many, many, many generations. And so hydropower, we believe, is not clean energy and is not green energy. And so that's the reason that we fight around the world against new hydropower projects. And also a film that we did, I don't know, 5, 6 years, actually, I think it was closer to 8 years ago, called Damnation, highlights what we believe are the impacts primarily here in North America. It's a global issue, but we focused in the film on North America around what we call deadbeat dams. Those are dams that were built generations ago that no longer serve any productive, they don't provide power at any meaningful level, but they continue to have all the negative impacts of hydropower. On the Balkans, and this is where the 2 connect, and Blue Heart was a film it's a film that a lot of us spent a lot of years building. So when I moved to Europe to head up the business for Patagonia, it was about the time that Damnation came out. And one of the things that we as new employees of Patagonia in Europe felt a responsibility to do was, where are the issues that we can impact? And we looked at a map of Europe and we realized that every single river across the entire continent of Europe had either been dammed, channelized, or in some other way permanently impacted. There were no free-flowing rivers left in all of Europe, with 2 exceptions, Russia and the Balkan Peninsula. And as we look deeper at that, what we came to understand is that in the Balkan Peninsula, there were over 3,000 hydropower projects in the works. So every remaining free flower river in Europe was going to be dammed. The first time I visited, I've been in and out of the Balkans since, more times than I can count. The first time I visited Albania was to protest in front of the Prime Minister's office, where we got into a bit of a tangle with the state police from Albania. The second time I visited Albania, I was invited into the Prime Minister's office to meet with the Prime Minister and talk about, is there a solution forward? Is there a path forward together? The third time I visited Albania was June of this year, where I sat down in front of the entire national media from Albania, NGOs, politicians, and others, and signed an MOU, a contract between Patagonia, the private American company, and the Ministry of Environment and Tourism from Albania, and we committed together to create Europe's first wild river national park. And when that park is dedicated, and my hope is it'll be the first phase early in 2023, other phases to follow to include every free-flowing tributary of that beautiful river, the minister and I are going to go on the road in the Balkans and other parts of Europe and elsewhere and really try to get in front of different people and prove to them that there's a new model where private companies, public institutions, and civil society can come together and conserve and restore the things most important to us.
Excellent. Okay, final question. Can one of you guys find somebody without a Patagonia jacket on, just so my neutrality remains intact, please? But it's last question, and it better not be the one that breaks the streak for how awesome they are. So.
Okay, so no promises, but I'm Nora. I'm in the School of Public Affairs, and I'm actually a former Patagonia employee at one of the Chicago stores. But when I first started working there, you were just starting your efforts for regenerative agriculture, which I learned so much about, and now I'm really passionate about it. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the progress that's been made and then your vision for the program.
Great question, and a really good one to close on. And so, thank you for asking. So the correction that I always make when we talk about regenerative agriculture, the thing that we talk about at Patagonia is regenerative organic agriculture, and there's a reason for that. It's a little bit like the word sustainability, which says everything and nothing at the same time. I think that the buzzword, if you could make a nice little living a decade ago by wandering around the halls of a business saying omni-channel, you could have a nice little run there for a while. And then it was sustainability. And I think we saw the same thing happening with the word regenerative, which it had these big ideas, but no real substance behind it. And, people are going to use and abuse the words they do. But what was foundationally important to us was that there was a high standard set for regenerative organic agriculture. And so we co-founded with a company called Dr. Bronner's and also an institute called the Rodale Institute from Pennsylvania. The three of us came together and co-founded the Regenerative Organic Alliance. Corley actually sits on the board on our behalf. And that has set a standard which can be measured and certified against, which is the regenerative organic certification. And so that organization exists. It is scaling at a good pace, but it defines very clearly, it provides very clearly a high bar definition of regenerative plus organic, because the concern I think that we saw, and unfortunately what I think we have seen since happen, is that people use that term really elastically, and at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily mean that much. It's really hard work. It's been really slow going, but I think that we're starting to get traction. I'm optimistic about the future of this. I think it's foundationally important. My guess is that with the news last week and some of the resources that we'll have available, this will be an area that we focus on a little bit disproportionately. And then finally, what I'll say in our own supply chain, I talked before about the switch to 100% organic cotton in the mid-90s. We are now working to scale in India and hope to get beyond just India, regenerative, organically grown cotton for all of our product. That's really the vision that we have for the future. And by the way, the value of regenerative organic agriculture, the lack of insecticides, pesticides, and otherwise, but really the idea is to create healthy topsoil in the process. So it's not do less harm, it's actually trying to do good. And that's really the big idea.
Well, thank you. Ryan, I'm going to give you an opportunity for final thoughts. You did mention earlier that Patagonia's news was important because it's difficult times. It can be really, in some ways we're polarized, there's so many challenges ahead of us. Can you end with us on what makes you optimistic or what you see as, the positives going forward?
Yeah, I'm going to thank you for that. And I think that's such an important question. I just feel this tremendous sense of guilt about the world that we've created. And I've got two young kids, 11 and 7 years old, and I think about it all the time. And I don't wallow in it, but what I realize is I just realize they're going to grow up in a world that's different than the one I grew up in. And that it's hard to apologize enough for that. And so I think what you have to do instead is be active. I personally, it's maybe a little bit obvious, but if you read anything I say, it's probably real obvious, which is I'm pretty cynical and I'm a little bit pessimistic. I'm super committed, but I'm really worried about where we're headed. And I was at a Washington Post event in the city yesterday morning, and the last question the person asked me was, you said you were on record somewhere as saying you're not optimistic about the future. Is that still how you feel given the news last week? And if feeling an obligation to be honest, I said, yeah, it is. It's exactly how I'm feeling. And then I went into the green room, and the last piece of the event was 3 young climate activists. And I say young, one of them was, I believe, 18. 2 of them were actually activists. One was an entrepreneur in the space. And I sat and I listened, and I looked at the poise, and I looked at the wisdom, and it reminds me of the quality of the questions in here. And I got to be honest, would I walk back on stage yesterday and say, you know what, I was wrong, I'm optimistic? No, but I'd say maybe.
Well, thank you so much. Can we give a big round of applause to Ryan Gellert, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you. Ryan, I want to thank you so much for being our distinguished lecturer this year. I want to thank Corley for making this all, possible as well. And to all of you, I always say these events are incredible. They make us feel good. What matters more is what we do when we leave this room. So here's my charge to you. If you haven't gotten your absentee ballot, if you need AU votes to help you, let's vote in this election. It is your voice that can change the future on so many of these things, so please be engaged. Secondly, are there issues that we talked about today that you care about? This university has opportunities in every school and in various departments to study some of the things that you care about. You can be passionate about what you do. I think Ryan's shown us this. So, reach out, find out what those opportunities are. I know I speak for, all the deans on campus to say they want you to get the best experience and show you, what's out there. I also say, reach out to the Sine Institute. If you like the programming we brought for you today, we're trying to bring different voices. You might not agree with them. Isn't that great, right? Let's learn something about, somebody who might not agree with us. But please, go to our website, email us ideas about programming. We want to bring to campus the conversations that you want. And then I would encourage you to look at Patagonia Action Works and other places to find out ways that you can be involved and be active on the issues you care about, because you can. And as Ryan's told us, every individual can make a difference. So thank you all. We'll see you at the next event. And thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.